Unhappiness with the electoral process, or apathy, may keep voters away from the polls. Already residents in Vuwani and Limpopo are threatening to boycott the election. They are unhappy at the prospect of incorporation into a new municipality. But will the number of voters who cast their ballots impact the election results? Is a boycott of the polls the answer to dissatisfaction with the government? Tonight we speak to the Institute of Race Relations, Gabriel Crouse, who joins me here in the studio. I'm sorry, I think you're having problems with your chair.
A little bit, that's
If you
all
start sinking down, it's not you, it's the chair. Voting trends this year, how have they differed? What can you tell us about it, and what does it suggest?
Right, so I think the biggest difference right off the bat is that in the last couple of election cycles, you've seen in the 5 years between national elections, about 2.5 million new people coming to register to vote. This time it's been sort of less than 1.5 million. So far fewer registrations. Under the age of 30, that means that more than half of people aren't registered to vote. So there's huge voter apathy, stay away. And I think
it's not only happening in South Africa, I believe it's all around the world. So is it a youth link, do you think?
Right. So I think one has to be careful of that, because it is true that around the world this trend has been seen, but the precipitous rate at which it's happened in South Africa in the last 5 years is a standout. Yeah, some of it has to do with youth apathy, some of it has to do with the fact that we're in the longest negative business cycle since World War II, and people kind of feel, I think, therefore, that governance and the rules-based system is not really playing ball in the kind of way that they feel like they can participate and win at. I think in terms of the people who are registered to vote and who they're likely to vote for, we're looking at around 55% ANC, which will be a significant drop, but still a strong win, 24% DA, 14% EFF, and then sort of about 10% to the smaller parties.
Yes, I was going to ask you about the smaller parties, what sort of impact that is likely to make. I mean, have you been able to gauge that?
Yeah, most of the smaller parties fall within the margin of error, so our sort of polling, what our polling says about what's going to happen over there is really a strong combination of political intuition, analysis, and then a little bit of the polling. We think that the bigger parties have managed to exert a great squeeze. One of the things you should know about the IRR polls is that they've happened over a period, September last year, December, February, April, and then the last week every day. And the smaller parties were doing really well. ACDP was looking at 7% in the Western Cape, for example, and they've just been squeezed down by the same old message of, like, don't throw your vote at a smaller party as a waste of a vote. And so we think that the ANC squeezed the EFF and the DA squeezed the smaller parties in the Western Cape in particular.
Yes, hearing those squeezes have been pretty effective, and I think possibly on voters too. I mean, you hear how many are disgruntled, they're not going to vote because they don't have any party that they are interested in. I mean, if you don't go out tomorrow and vote, what sort of impact is that likely to have?
So I think that if there's a low voter turnout, because of the low registration numbers, if there's a 71% turnout, which would sort of be in trend with what we've been looking at over the last 25 years, then that'll mean about half of South Africans don't vote. That'll mean that the ruling party, which is going to be the ANC, is going to have a bit of a crisis of legitimacy, but it's also going to mean the National Assembly itself is going to have a crisis of legitimacy, because it can't easily say, without looking at the numbers, that it speaks for all South Africans, since half of South Africans just didn't want to go there in the first place. I would encourage South Africans who feel like there's no party that speaks to them to go there and spoil their ballot, to make an explicit point about that, because I think it's going to be easy for them
is that? I mean, who reads that message? Do you just feel good about going to the polls and doing something?
So I think that if you look at the fact that we've got about 27 odd new parties on the ballot this time, that's a sign that a lot of sort of political entrepreneurs, visionaries, people who think they have a way that things could work better, have put up their hands and said, look at me. I think if none of them get the attention that they want, you get a lot of spoiled ballots, then that'll encourage more of the same going forward.
Because also people see it as quite a negative space, isn't it? I mean, corruption and all those sort of things that are holding back our parties. I mean, is there a drive now to come up with a more positive outlook from political parties that we can do and we really will change?
For sure. Something that Ipsos polling, one of our competitors, but that does really good work, shows over the last decade is that in the build-up to the 2009 election of Jacob Zuma, South Africa was really in a place where more people thought the country was going in the wrong direction than in the right direction. Then in the campaign, they started to come around to it. He gets elected. and that there's a 30-point swing, and suddenly 60% of the country says we're going in the right direction, and only 30% says we're going in the wrong direction. So I think South Africans, when we come to elections, we come with a lot of enthusiasm, especially if there's new leadership in the ANC. It changes that, and it changes everything else around that. And we get very excited and very optimistic. Last time, we know how that worked out. Is it going to work out like that again? I don't have a glass ball, so I can't tell you for sure, but I think it's a reason to be apprehensive about too much optimism. I think parties that come forward with a clear plan of how they can not give you everything, but how they can make things incrementally a little bit better, step for step, I hope that people take those.
Can be achieved.
Yeah, I hope people take those seriously, because ain't nothing getting done if you don't put a little effort into it.
Those who will boycott the vote, do politicians listen to that? Does it make any impact at all?
Yeah, so I think politicians in the arena don't listen to that. It's the hopefuls outside that look at that. Politicians in the arena are going to look at the fact that about half of South Africans don't vote. And I think if anyone is listening to it, it's going to be figures like Omle Khashale, I'm not saying his name right. It's going to be figures in the ANC who think that their party is sort of half great and half riddled with corruption and bad actors and people with bad policy ideas, and think that what they need to do is reform the ANC itself, perhaps by reforming the process by which ANC leaders get elected, so that they have open primaries, so that there's a more direct parliamentary system there. Because a lot of people who don't vote at all are ANC voters who think it's ANC or nothing. And so that stay-away vote, I think if it is high, I think there's a small chance that it's going to scare the ANC into looking at internal reform.
And how important is it for the international community and our neighbours, looking at what's going on here, that it is seen as a free and fair election, and one held with enthusiasm?
Yeah, I mean, South Africa has been a real beacon on the top of a shining hill in a way that I think we often take for granted. I've spoken to a lot of immigrants that have come to this country from neighbouring SADC regions that have been in serious end-of-the-road crises of democracy, and say, you guys have no idea how good you have it here. And I think every time we have the chance, it's important for us to be leaders in that regard, and not to sort of go down the same roads that some of our neighbours have gone down, leading to the kinds of crises that really are quite predictable and hurt people very hard.
Daniel Crouse, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Still ahead is government supporting and encouraging the growth of small businesses. We ask, what can South Africans learn from foreign entrepreneurs?